Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to hearing 25, the Matangi Dairy Factory proposed zoning. I think all the people that are on this call are fairly familiar with our sort of modus operandi for these hearings. And I'll just, before we do some introductions, just remind everybody of those. And I think these comments are particularly relevant given the fairly narrow degrees of difference there are between all the people that are on the call today. We've also had, and I think it was at our hearing 2, we had a fairly lengthy presentation from Mr. Mowbray about his aspirations for this property. We'd been to the site and had a look around, so we're pretty familiar, I think, with those details. So we're really asking the participants today to really sharpen things up, if you like, and focus not so much on background, but on issues in contention, and particularly how those issues in contention it's proposed to address them. So we're not anticipating being here all afternoon, because we think the issues are, whilst there's a few of them, they are relatively circumscribed, they're fairly tightly defined. So we're looking for everybody's assistance in just focusing on those, please. We should do a quick round of introductions first. I should have introduced myself at the start. I'm Phil Mitchell, an independent commissioner. I'm chairing these hearings. I'll ask the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, and then if we could just go around the virtual room, please, so we all know who's present.
Hello, I'm Diane Fulton. I'm Independent Commissioner and a former Waikato District Councillor.
Kia ora, my name is Linda Tiaho and I'm an Independent Commissioner.
Kia ora, Will Marg, Independent Commissioner.
Paul Cooney, Deputy Chair, Independent Commissioner and Lawyer.
Thank you. That's the panel. And if we could perhaps just the council staff and advisors, and then we can go around the room with the various submitters that are present, please.
Afternoon all, Fletcher here, District Plan Administrator and Hearings Coordinator.
Good afternoon, it's Betty Connolly here, Section 42, report writer.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly.
Morning, Betty.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jane McCartney here, and my colleague Taljit, just calling in from the Turkau office as observers only. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. McCartney.
Sandra Kelly, District Plan, Senior District Plan Coordinator.
Thank you.
Hello, Neil Taylor. I'm on the council staff as well, and I'm just observing today.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor.
Kia ora, I'm Carolyn Rett, just Assistant Counsel.
Which I think brings us to our submitter folk. So
where's he going? Okay. Hi, I'm Harry Mowbray. I'm the owner of the Matangi Dairy Factory.
Thanks, Mr. Mowbray. Welcome.
I'm Fraser McNutt from Barker & Associates, Harry's planner.
Thank you, Mr. McNutt.
Hi there, I'm Tricia Simonson. I'm a Senior Engineer and Geologist from Ormiston Associates, specialising in on-site wastewater.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Cameron Inder, Transportation Engineer, Blocks and Burnett and Oliver, helping Harry on this project.
Thanks very much. Ms. McCallie, I think.
Yep.
Over to you.
Yep. Kia ora, Carolyn McCallie from Heritage New Zealand, planning staff.
Thank you very much. Look, I think without further ado, let's crack into things. Our normal batting order, as per the hearing schedule, is Ms. Connolly will summarise her section 42A report recommendations. Then we'll hear from the Mowbray Group. Then we'll hear from Heritage New Zealand. And if we have any questions at the end of each person's presentation, we'll ask them. So I think let's kick off just when you're ready. Thanks, Ms. Connolly.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I take on board what you said, Commissioner Mitchell, and I'm quite happy happy to, I'm assuming you've overread all of this in the background and everything, and I'm quite happy to just go to the points of discussion if that's.
Thank you, that would be helpful. I should say, and I may not have said it explicitly, we have read all the material that's been provided, and that's why we're wanting to take the approach that we have. We're not keen on people reading out vast chunks of material that we've already read. It doesn't help the people reading it out, and it certainly doesn't help us greatly. So you're on the money, Ms. Connolly.
That's
so
fine. I do
over to you.
have some maps in that may be useful just for you to get context.
Thank you, that would be helpful.
Fletcher, could you put up map 1, please? This is actually the location of the site. Everything outlined in blue. You can see Matangi Road, which is off to the left, and Tauwhiri Road down to the south. Matangi Road takes you out to State Highway 26 and about 7 kilometres up to Hillcrest, and Tauwhiri takes you down to State Highway 1 and about 4.5. So the next one is the proposed zoning is on the district plan. So it's currently proposed to be industrial with 2 small lots of business in the front. And the lovely purple column in the front, in the middle, is the registered heritage building. And the next one, Fletcher, please. These are just a few photos that I took when I was on site. Can you just run through them, Fletcher? Thank you. And they are just actually show a few details of mainly the Glaxo building, but just basically the entrance to the site as well. So,
thank you, that's a helpful reminder. I should just restating, we have been to the site and seen pretty much all of what you've shown us there from as well. So thanks for that, It's a good reminder.
Now the next one is actually for, just so that you can see, put this into context. This is a Delangam property. This is the submitter that is against that last little piece of rural zone at the back. So you can see the piece of highlighted in red around there. That's the piece they want still as kept as rural. But their property is highlighted in purple.
Thank you.
Okay, so going on to the provisions not agreed, Mr. McNutt agreed with most of my provisions when we put them through. He does have some that he's not agreeing with. So this is, the first one is the minor residential unit, and in the general scheme of things, in an ordinary zone, yes, you can have a minor residential unit to go with a primary dwelling. Mr. McNutt still thinks that this should be applicable. I disagree because I don't see that it can work in this context. And this map on the screen now shows you what I understand is the dwellings there. That's circled in red. So A and B, I understand, will be deleted. C sits out by itself and I really don't think is applicable for a minor residential unit.
Have we got a cursor here that we could point to those?
It's just going round there now, round C now. Yep.
So where's A and B?
A and B are the 2 front ones.
Yep.
C is the one that's basically on the edge of the driveway as you drive into the site.
Yep.
D and E are at the 2 end ones that are attached to other factory buildings. And F and G are way down the back of the site. Yes, at the very end, those 2. So to me, the context of a minor residential dwelling unit does not fit with where those dwellings are on site. My prime example is C probably, because I think that really is the real one that you would consider is the front of the entrance to the site, and to put a minor dwelling in there would be, I'm not quite sure where you'd even put it. So I still stand by my decision that that rule is not applicable. The next issue we have is site building coverage. And on the site, the aerial above, you can see that the site has a high proportion of built coverage now. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been told exactly what that amount is. I don't know whether Mr. Mowbray has that actual amount. But while the site coverage, Mr. McNutt would like 70%, and he has based that on an industrial zone. To me, we're not creating an industrial zone, we're creating a mixed use zone. So it's, to me, it is easier and better, not easier, but it's better that we have a slightly less coverage because we are creating an amenity. We are creating something different, and you have to have a certain amount of amenity to create a mixed use zone. If you're going to put residential development in there, you're going to put in the long-term apartments, you need to have open space. And to build a 70% site coverage in there is not, in my opinion, the best option for that site. I've also worked on the principle that the 70% site coverage needs to work in with the rest of the site, and there's 20%, you will note that I've put in there for permeability, just to ensure that there is a certain amount of amenity there and green space. And then the site is reliant on wastewater disposal. So you will see there is a huge amount of impervious surface already, particularly around in the middle of the site. And my real concern is if you put 70% of site building coverage plus add in all of that impervious surface that's already there, plus the discharge, plus the 20%, it doesn't actually all going to add up to 100%. So I stand by my recommendation that stays at 60%. The visitor accommodation, just before I go on that, there was something that came to my mind yesterday. The 20% permeable surface, I would like I have recommended that, and I would like the commissioners, the panel, to consider that that is exclusive of the wastewater disposal area, because I don't really think it's logical to have 20% public permeable surface, which actually is including your wastewater disposal area. Visitor accommodation was one that I actually moved on in my rebuttal. Started off at 4, have gone up to 6. I haven't heard anything contrary to that. And the extent of scheduling is one that is in contention with Heritage New Zealand, and I'm sure they will wish to clarify this in their summary statement. So that's as far as I can have to say. That's the issues that I find in contention, and I'm open to questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Connolly. I think what we might do is let's progress and hear from the Mowbray team and then Ms. McKelly. And I think we might ask our questions sort of in a bit more, because there's not a lot of people in the room. We might ask them in a more discussion-based forum, I think, if in fact we do have any. So unless the panel have any objection to that approach, I think we'll carry on and hear from the Mowbray team, then Ms. McKelly, and then we'll ask whatever questions we want in the broad to the group as a whole. Does anyone object to that approach?
No.
All right. I guess you're, I was going to say herding the cats, steering the ship, Mr. McNutt. So over to you, thanks.
Thank you. How we're going to arrange our batting order this afternoon is Mr. Mowbray is going to go first, then myself, then Ms. Simonson, and then Cameron Inda. So without further ado.
Yeah, thank you, guys. As you say, there's not much point going back through the presentation that I gave last time. But I think it's worth touching on the fact that this site has got an extraordinary history, and it's a really important site to save for the whole of New Zealand and for agriculture and industry. So that's really all I need to say about history, I believe. I know that you people gave me some pretty positive feedback when I first did that presentation and suggested I get planners involved, and so that's what we've done. The vision for the site hasn't changed. Basically, I want to create this extraordinary living and operating historic zone, and which encompasses all of the buildings that are there, and also, as I've mentioned before, bringing on other historic buildings that are about to be demolished. So we've found a number of those buildings, and I think it's fair to say that it will be an extraordinary asset going forwards for the whole community in Matangi. Right up to this point, there's been just by doing what we've done to the factory so far, has had an extraordinary effect on Matangi real estate and also the local school and what have you. Once again, that's all written down. We've made a lot of effort to be a big part of the general community, including being on the community committee and also heritage, the heritage panel. And recently I've been working with the Heritage Forum, which goes Waikato district-wide. So, and along with that, we had a lot of community events there that when they want to hold events, and we've made all that happen. So essentially we've had a huge backing, as you will see, from every organisation that is community-based in Matangi, and you've had a number of endorsements on that. We think it's also an appropriate site for us to be acknowledging that other history of the Waikato, which is of course, all the railway houses and the railway development, because Matangi railway line was apparently from there, out of Matangi, was the most profitable line in New Zealand once the factory was built. So, once again, we've covered all that in the previous presentation. So I think, unless you've got any questions, you know, the vision is to do and make something extraordinary.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mowbray. As indicated, I think we'll press on and get the full picture, and then we'll see if we do have any questions of you or your team or any of the others. So, Mr. McNutt, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I'm not going to reread all the evidence in rebuttal, but in summary, it's my opinion still that our proposal gives effect to the higher order strategic planning documents and also the non-statutory documents as well. And I'm going to go straight to the areas of contention, which I believe are very limited. I want to emphasise the collaborative approach that we've had with the Council and Heritage New Zealand in getting to this point, and we've really narrowed in on the issues, and I thank them for that. So in terms of the 42A recommendations, in stated paragraphs 34 to 53, the analysis, the 42A report, as I said, there's been a collaborative approach taken to drafting these proposed provisions. Care was taken where possible to align with the national planning standards. We're both applicable in terms of drafting, but also formatting and structure. A comprehensive set of objectives and policies were drafted with compatible rules, maps, and one additional definition. These were then refined with a recommended set of provisions contained in Appendix 2 of the 42A report, which, subject to the following topics, I'm in complete alignment with and agreement. The matters of which I still do not agree with Ms. Connolly's recommendations are outlined in my rebuttal evidence and expanded upon as follows. So just touching on the minor residential unit, Ms. Connolly has proposed to delete that provision, as she's just stated. Her reasons are summarised in points 56 to 58 and pertain to difficulty in siting the 20 metre and availability of servicing. It's a setback. I disagree with these points. The siting of a minor residential unit is setback from a building, not a site area. Whether the building is existing or proposed, it would be easy to determine a setback from the exterior walls of a building. I cite Ms. Simonson's evidence in chief, section 7, which provides a range of different capacity options that the site can provide for in terms of future land use types. I also reinforce the proposed cap that we would place in the number of dwellings that can be accommodated on site, which naturally limits the number of potential minor residential units. So we're not saying just because you've got, say, 7 units on site that every single one of them is going to have a ancillary unit. We're asking for that possibility. The council 42A rebuttal states that the main focus of the site is for business and light industrial activities to be undertaken with residential development, with residential dwelling and community activities being the secondary purpose, and no changes are proposed. I further respond to this by acknowledging that through the proposed and recommended objectives and policies, a range of development is enabled. See the Matangi mixed use zone objective 1, the mixed use environment that promotes commercial, residential, business and light industrial activities equally and not through a hierarchical preference. Furthermore, the broad range of anticipated effects that could occur through servicing, high quality urban form are all managed and anticipated through the objectives and policies that are proposed. As an example, objective and policy 5, 7 and 8. The siting of minor residential units, in my view, would still need to comply with and be managed by the suite of bulk and location provisions, which include setback, site coverage, permeability and height to boundary as examples. I can see no evidential reasons why each dwelling could not be afforded the ability to have a minor unit associated with it, bearing in mind the minor units could also provide alternative accommodations for different persons that may not be best suited to a larger dwelling. I then move on to the visitor accommodation rule 29.1.1. Ms. Connolly has proposed to cap the number of buildings that can be used for visitor accommodation to 4. She then has reconsidered through her rebuttal and recommended an amendment to allow for 6 buildings. I still disagree with this cap for the following reasons. The use of refurbished railway buildings is at the heart of Mr. Mowbray's vision for the site. The use of the buildings for visitor accommodation is akin to an Airbnb type accommodation, not a hotel or a motel complex. There is already a diverse range of activities occurring on site and plenty of unused building gross floor area yet to be converted. There is, in my opinion, reasonable scope to provide for a range of land use activities in conjunction with the additional development or reuse. Paragraph 22 of the 42A rebuttal evidence states, it is also noted that at any time, any one of these buildings proposed for visitor accommodation could be converted into a residential dwelling without the knowledge of council and therefore avoid the resource consent process. My view is that this matter is significantly hypothetical and not based on any evidence. It's my view, and based on my many years of council experience as consents manager at Hamilton City Council, that I can confidently say that this is an enforcement and monitoring issue and not something that should be precluded through the use of land through the plan making process. The bulk and location, servicing and occupancy provisions will adequately manage, in my view, any potential adverse environmental effects. I think it is entirely appropriate that that provision be made to accommodate 9 visitor accommodation buildings with the cap of 6 persons. I then turn my mind to the site coverage provision Ms. Connolly has discussed. Now, I would like some clarification from council on the definition that we're working towards when we talk about building coverage, because if it is solely around built form, then by my calcs, we're circa 10,000 square metres of building coverage on site. With a 5.2 hectares site, we're roughly 19%, and I would therefore on that basis be comfortable and accept the 60% site coverage, which is Ms. Connolly's recommendation. If we are talking about impermeable surfaces, access ways, parking, hard stand areas, I need that clarified because we need to take that into account. The reason I say this is, as Harry has said, and as per the existing policy, this is about the reuse and the revitalisation of his site. This is not about creating a large amount of new buildings. for various reasons. So what we want to avoid is unnecessary resource consents down the track because of the technicality, and that's something that I'd like to clarify. So just to reiterate, if it's about just built form, we're at 90% circa, we will accept the 60, that is fine. If not, can we please have some clarification on that and have a discussion? I then move to the rebuttal evidence of Carolyn McKelly, and I read and understood that evidence. And I am discussing primarily the extent of setting for the Glaxco building. My comments still stand in terms of what I wrote in my rebuttal evidence section 4, and that the extent of setting should remain as recommended in the section 42A report. I also stress that Ms. Connolly made her point in paragraph 102 of the 42A that I do not have heritage expertise, and I do not have those expertise to assess the merits of any extent. I do, however, seek a reasonable and practical setting, particularly to the rear of the Glaxco building. So that's towards the train tracks at the back there. That does not restrict the ability for future development or unnecessary resource consent applications, taking into account the railway designation, setbacks, and the rational internal vehicle circulation. My preference is that the extent remain as recommended by the section 42A officer. To summarise, subject to the above, I'm in agreement with the section 42A recommendations that were subsequently altered through the exchange of rebuttal in relation to the set of objectives and policies, the set of standards, both land use and subdivision, with relevant bulk and location controls, the relevant activity statuses, the relevant matters of discretion, the extent and purpose of commercial overlay, and the extent of the 42A Glaxco building heritage setting, as I just discussed. This site will allow for the current land use activities and enhances the opportunity for repurpose and use of the larger amount of vacant land and buildings within the site for alternative uses, such as multi-unit residential, community events, functions, as well as providing additional commercial opportunity to support the growing suburb village, I should have said. There's been effective communication between both the 42 officer, myself, and Historic Places in the lead up to this hearing. Unresolved matters are not substantial and in my view should not preclude the rezoning of my client's land to special purpose mixed use zone.
All right, thanks, Mr. McNutt. Ms. Simonson?
Thank you. I don't believe there are any issues of contention regarding the on-site wastewater servicing aspect of the proposal, so I'll be very quick. Just stating that I have completed a site investigation, and in my view, the proposed rezoning of the property can be serviced in terms of an on-site wastewater discharge through a wastewater treatment system capable of producing secondary treated wastewater, such as a recirculating textile filter, with discharge to land up to a total development design flow of 24,500 litres of wastewater per day. And this is combined domestic and light industrial flows. Both the current wastewater discharge and future additional discharges will require authorisation via Waikato Regional Council discharge consent. However, in my opinion, there's a viable solution that I could support as described in my evidence, which will gain discharge consent with standard conditions. The Section 42A report is generally supportive of my original evidence with respect to management of the existing and future on-site discharges, that large-scale or wet industrial activities are not appropriate in this location, and that subdivision should not be contemplated until such time as sewage reticulation is available. So basically, overall, I consider that the proposed mixed-use zoning of the site can be managed with suitable solution from an on-site wastewater perspective. And in my opinion, there's no reason why the rezoning would be precluded. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Simonson. Let's carry on. Mr. Inder.
Yes, thank you. Likewise, I'll just touch on a couple of key points, and there's just one matter in terms of some wording of the transport rule that Ms. Connolly has provided rebuttal evidence on, and I've considered that and have some thoughts on that to offer. Just the first thing I guess I wanted to point out is to reiterate that the proposed mixed-use zone will produce a much better outcome for the Matangi community in terms of the transport safety and function when compared to the proposed zoning at present, which enables predominantly industrial land uses. Those industrial land uses would permit heavy industry and potentially significant numbers of large HCVs accessing the site on a daily basis. But in contrast, the Matangi light industrial zone, part of this mixed-use zone, restricts the types of industrial activities to small scale and low generators of HCV movements. So that's definitely a positive thing for the community as a whole. Just stepping through to my rebuttal evidence, I had made a comment in regards to the accommodation, visitor accommodation, and just wanted to highlight there that there is no traffic or transportation reason why there needs to be a limit. Reiterating that there are already transportation rules on which talk about activities and cumulative traffic generation for the whole site, which would limit the effects regardless of how many visitor accommodation dwellings there are. Just stepping now through to the rule. So it was rule S7. Ms. Connolly had a look at my rebuttal evidence where I had attempted to remove ambiguity, but in fairness, I do see you take the point that I've actually added a little ambiguity by using the word typical, which isn't necessarily a measurable aspect for traffic engineering. So in that consideration, I'm happy with Ms. Connolly's removal of that word typical. However, the use of the word maximum on its own is problematic as well, because, as we all know, traffic volumes fluctuate on any given day, but typically around an average, either average daily flow or an average maximum peak. And so I'd like to propose that we're inserting the word average before the word maximum each time that appears in that rule. So, for instance, the rule reads, any permitted, controlled or restricted discretionary activity within the MUZ-M creating one, I'm saying here, an average maximum, and I'd suggest volume per individual activity. At the moment it reads individual volume per activity. I'm suggesting average maximum volume per individual activity of 250 vehicle movements per day, and a cumulative average maximum volume not exceeding 2,200 vehicles per day, or, and then number 3, cumulative average maximum peak hour volume not exceeding 330 vehicle movements per day. So typically what that allows is that a traffic engineer would, if there was any contention around this, run, say, a week's worth of traffic counts, and within that you'd of course get 5 peak hours, and within that you'd take the average maximum peak hour, not particularly one given day, because that's an effect on that specific day, but you want to look at what this activity or the site is generating on average. So that's.
And you have to be specific as to how you create that average, though. Otherwise, you can not. I don't mean manipulate it.
Yeah, well, that comes down to ethics, really. But no, the issue is that when you're doing a traffic count and you have that information, presenting it to council and saying, here is the daily volumes on these 5 days. Here are the 5 peak hours that were measured. The average maximum across those peak hours, that may well be the 85th percentile. As well, or may actually be the median, you don't know, but to take one spot day and say, oh, you've exceeded the 330 vehicle movements, for instance, and therefore you're not complying, but yet the other 4 days below 330, that wouldn't be reasonable.
No, I get that point, but don't you have to be specific as to how you calculate the average? You know, is it an average over 10 readings, 100 readings, all in the weekend, you know, weekdays? Aren't there so many variables that mean you can make it whatever you want?
Yeah, you could. Typically, you wouldn't take anything less than a week. That's industry best practice, but often you would be citing 2 weeks worth of data as a minimum. and then depending on how significant the effects are, you may well then start looking at seasonal issues as well, but I don't expect that to be necessary in this case.
But this is being used as a threshold, you know, and if you're on the right side of the line, you get a tick, and if you're on the wrong side of the line, you get a cross. Then you've got to go through an extra process. Surely that needs to be explicit as to whether you're in or out.
Yeah, okay, and taking that point, we could then add in the average is measured over 5 weekdays.
What does it do at other, what else does the district plan do in this regard? Because traffic numbers and limitations and so forth are not just confined to this site, they apply across the board.
Yeah.
You gave evidence at a Hiniwai, for example. What
Yes.
approach was taken there?
Well, so I always consider it to be industry best practice that we are talking about either averages or 85th percentiles. So when I'm dealing with other traffic engineers, there's just this known case that you don't take one individual count and say, well, that's representative. I don't think I'm not disagreeing with that. Yeah, but there is debate. There often is debate about, well, was that week of counts a reasonable picture of this site? And then you have to talk about, well, why wasn't it a reasonable picture? But nothing less than a week, typically, of information would be sufficient. So I'd be happy to add in a advice note or something to that effect, that a minimum of 1 week's data would be needed for considering average maximums and average daily volumes.
Okay. Thank you.
That's about all I have to say.
All right, let's just let's press on. Ms. McKellie, let's hear from you, and then we'll do a bit of a roundup in terms of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. In the meantime, Robin Byron, our Senior Conservation Architect, has also joined us, and she might be able to speak further to the extent of setting diagram. So we only have 2 outstanding matters. One is the extent of setting diagram. So since the time of my rebuttal, we lodged the summary statement, I think it was on Tuesday, and we attached to that a revised extent of setting, which is slightly larger than the one that Ms. Connolly submitted, and it is smaller in extent than the one we submitted in my original evidence.
Could you take us through that? Could you show it up and just
I think I can do that. It is Appendix 1. Oh, you've got it there already.
Yes, that's right.
Very good. Sorry, I've got it here too, but that's good. Thanks.
So I think it would be best if Ms. Byron took you through that diagram.
Okay.
Would you mind, just before you do that, can you just make that a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier to read on the screen? Keep going. That'll do. That's good, I think.
Can you turn it up the right way? That's it.
There we go. Great. Thank you. That's
So Robin, if you could just work through the changes that you made to that diagram as opposed to what Betty originally originally put in her evidence.
Ms. Byron, you might need to unmute yourself.
Apologies.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that after the site visit that the owner, Harry Mowbray, kindly offered Carolyn and I to attend and generously gave his time to show us around the site, we were not resiling from the original diagram that was in my colleague Carolyn's evidence. which tried to identify areas of the site, considering the interest in moving buildings onto the site. We had tried to suggest that they be constrained to certain areas of the site where they wouldn't impact on the authenticity of the collection of buildings of the dairy factory. Having been to the site and considering the practicalities of kind of in a pragmatic way, Heritage New Zealand presently only has the Glaxo building listed with us. And having been to the site, we're struck by the dominance of that building on the site. It's a very, it's quite a commanding building, and it sits at the center of the former dairy factory site. And in looking at, we thought, well, if we were just to consider the site surrounds for the and setting for the Glaxo building on its own, what do we make of the proposal by Ms. Connolly to the setting diagram that she proposed? And it seemed to us that if we could include the triangle of land between the evaporator and spray dryer building. This diagram, by the way, is quite distorted from the original map, but the triangle between those buildings, and as you come in the entrance looking towards the Glaxo building, then it would offer a really good amount of open space to truly appreciate the building. We were concerned that with the diagram as it's been proposed, if there were any buildings that were constructed within that triangle, they would have a detrimental effect on the visual appreciation of the building as you entered the site. Moreover, we understood from the owner that there was an intent to preserve that area at the front as an open space, that it might be a combination of garden and gardens and plantings and walkways and so on. And it seemed would be more appropriate to try and include that piece of land as part of that overall conception. Towards the back of the building, and I guess a little bit to the side, we also felt that just a little bit more breathing space around the building was necessary. Given the scale of the Glaxo building, when you're on the site, it's important to have a fair bit of space around it so that you can stand back from the building and appreciate all of its industrial character and its details and its construction and its complicated roof line. And that if the line is only really just beyond the back of the remnant of chimney, then anything that might be built up to that line was going to, in my view, constrain the ability to really appreciate the back of the building. And there's so much scope there to be able to create a kind of gathering space or more communal space for all of the activities anticipated in the future on this site. It seemed to us that it would be a better outcome if that could be pushed out a little bit further, so that there was a decent amount of space behind the chimney and maintaining a deeper open space to appreciate the building. Similarly to the side, notwithstanding that there's no protection for the evaporator or spray or dry spray dryer building that, I mean, we would certainly hope that those buildings could be adaptively reused, but even if they were replaced by something else, by maintaining that other little space to the end of the spray dryer building, we again achieved a little bit more generosity of space around the Glaxo building that better protected its a visual appreciation of the building.
Thanks, Robin.
All right, thank you.
And the only other matter, Ms. Connolly, there was discussion back and forth about two particular policies, and in two instances we do accept Ms. Connolly's amendments, and the only outstanding policy for us is MUZ MP1 range of activities, and Heritage New Zealand continues to seek the changes that they sought in the original evidence. And we're open to questions.
All right, thank you very much. I think what we might do is just, as I say, go around the panel one by one, and we can make this a little bit interactive as well. If something happens during the course of a question from someone who's already asked questions, we can revisit that and ask some extra ones. So, but let's start with you, Mr. Marg, please.
Just going back to, I'm just thinking about car parking, and if you could remind me, Mr. McNutt, about the availability for car parking when we consider going from six dwellings to 9, and then having 6 people if they were all to bring a car. Is there enough available space?
So just in response to that, so there's two things going on here. There's the amount of dwellings that could be placed on site with ancillary units, and then there is visitor accommodation. So there's just to be clear, so there's two things. So I'll address the first one. So if we could maybe just have the original plan just up on the screen, which showed like the locations of the dwellings, and there was some ancillary flats, because I think that's quite helpful. But from memory, there is 5 dwellings, I think, on site and 2 ancillary flats. So with existing car parking available throughout the site, that whole area where lot 2 DPS, where the cursor is right now. Well, I'm sure if you've all been on site, you would have seen that the extended car parking that's available on site. So it's all around there. And there's access way down to buildings F and G, which have heaps of room for car parking. So in my view, with the existing dwellings, and if there was 2 more placed on site, in my view, there's plenty of room for a couple of car parks for each. I'd probably also cite the MPS UD, which is trying to move us away from car parking as well. So we wouldn't want to be worrying about minimums. And the idea of this mixed use zone is that you could work and live there as well. So then just moving on to the visitor accommodation, which I think was quite important to your question, which referred to the 6-person occupancy limit, which we wanted. So that was, in my view, just to set a limit per building. And for me, that could be a family, a couple. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's about inviting 6 individuals with 6 cars to our site, to our building. So I sort of refer to the Airbnb and my own experiences in using that with my own family or friends. So yeah, my expectation wasn't that a car would be afforded to each occupant. So that would be my take on that, and that's similar to your view, Mr. Linder.
Exactly right. No, I think the key point here is definitely that we're moving away from providing car parks to meet so-called demand, because we're wanting more people to walk and cycle. And the point of the mixed use in that respect is that you don't necessarily need a car if you live there and work there. Or you might have one car per family instead of 3.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marg.
Just a question to you, Mr. Marbury. How's the Tikawiti Courthouse looking now?
The Tikawiti Ministry of Works building?
Yes.
We've got it sitting on site. It's the next building we'd like to put together so that it gets the protection it needs. Yeah, that's yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fulton.
Thank you. Yes, just following on briefly, the security of the site when you're going to have residents on site and also for the protection of your properties, is it, or does it now operate like a gated community? I mean, is there a mixed? Is there a gate shutting process and a process in place now?
No, there isn't. We've got cameras around site and lighting, and that's basically the security systems as well as alarms. So that's I didn't really want to gate it. I wanted it to have a degree of if you're going to be living there or being able to come in and out as a business, I mean, there's service vehicles coming in, reasonably early in the morning at times. So no, there was no anticipation to do that.
Okay, thank you. Just one on the wastewater and the site coverage. I just was wanting to confirm that all the wastewater that can be managed on site, of which you told us it could, the stormwater from the buildings and so on, is that part of the wastewater or is that separately managed by another drainage system?
No, that's correct. The stormwater is not part of the wastewater system. It's generally bad practice to try and combine those two things. We're spending a lot of money treating clean water. The stormwater currently is discharged into a network, and we've committed that all future new buildings will have the stormwater from those roofs managed via individual on-site soakage. And then the wastewater itself, the domestic and industrial wastewater, if there's any industrial waste, is managed completely separately.
Okay, so any alteration to any of the buildings, for instance, the existing houses, would then be required to put their stormwater, roof water down that system. Is that right?
They'll have individual on-site soakage systems for each of the new buildings on site to manage the stormwater that's collected from the roofs.
Okay, thank you. I think that's me at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tiaho?
Just in terms of the comment that you just made about the new builds, how many existing buildings are there? How many new buildings are proposed compared to the existing buildings that you might do up?
It's a little bit hard to say because we've got a number of buildings. I mean, we're trying to make this into a precinct with other heritage buildings, and you honestly don't know what is going to turn up. So, but essentially there'll be a precinct at the front of the factory, which there won't be any really much more roof space going in that area because we'll be removing 2 of the houses there in the whole process once it's met its, got to the final stage. And then there'll be extra buildings go around to create a precinct at the back of the site. Once again, the people are living into that whole centre and operating into that centre. So there's not going to be a lot of extra roof go on. There's going to be some roof that goes, there's already been some roof that's gone. And so, yeah, I mean, at present, there's a very, very significant stormwater system on site. And Matangi Drainage Board are now managing that. And we've actually hooked Matangi into it, which has been hugely beneficial for the whole drainage in the Matangi area.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Tiaho. Mr. Cooney?
Yes, just a few questions. Mr. McNutt, the dwellings, what sort of cap are you seeking there?
7.
Seven
dwellings. Yep, and I'm also asking for the ability for an ancillary for each, noting 2 are already on site.
So why do you seek on this type of site? Why are you seeking an ancillary building? A dwelling's a dwelling, isn't it? For your purposes, why don't you just seek an increase in the cap?
Well, from my perspective, I felt that having a mix on site, 7 was appropriate. 2 more. The intent was, as I've always said, to reuse the existing GFA and space. And also we're trying to manage our wastewater as well. And also we're not proposing subdivision, and we agree with the non-complying activity status for that as well. So this is not about residential development, but incorporating that. And I would add incorporating different forms of accommodation as you would in the residential zone, such as ancillary units that might be for a dependent. Mum and dad might get old, who knows, might get kicked out by the missus, who knows. You just might want to have a spot there you can use alternatively. So that's the purpose.
Yeah, because I'm going to say to you, this minor dwellings really developed from the granny flat approach, isn't it? And that's not the sort of concept you're wanting to develop here. So I just raised that issue. Visitor accommodation, what's the cap you're looking there? 9.
9.
Yeah. Okay. And a limit of 6 people per unit. So what, Mr. Mulberry, what is the intention here? Is it to tenant these dwellings out, or is your intention eventually to subdivide and sell them off, or what's the long term?
Well, from my personal point of view, there's no intention to subdivide at all, and there's no intention to sell any of them. It was primarily for visitor accommodation, and so that people could experience some of the history of New Zealand, I guess. You know, the little farm cottages and the railway cottages, and read about that history, and actually just basically enjoy and understand the history.
Yeah.
So and there'll be on each building there'll be a tastefully designed sort of little heritage plaque explaining the buildings and where they came from and how they got there. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary story, that whole railway story from the 1920s. Yeah. In the, yeah. You know, yeah. And before that as well.
Yeah. The dwellings, would you be used for workers on site or people living in the area, would they?
No, that wasn't the anticipation. It was basically visitor dwelling.
So I'm just wondering the difference between.
It was a little more problematic with COVID, but I mean,
I'm a little bit confused. You're looking for visitor accommodation. Is that they're separate dwelling places to the actual dwellings? Is that right?
So I'll just clarify. So a cap of 7 dwellings.
Yep.
And 9, an additional 9 visitor accommodation buildings. I think if we just talk to them like that, that might make it easier.
Yeah. So I can understand the visitors coming and staying in the visitor accommodation, but I just trying to get a handle on the dwelling side of it. So what's the intention there? I I take it that some people have their businesses there or tenanted businesses, so that they could live there as well. Is that the intention?
That's what's there at the moment, and then the history of the place. Yeah, since it left the dairy company.
Yeah.
So that was existing when we purchased.
Yeah. Okay. Just on subdivision, Mr. McNutt, you'd be looking at if somehow there was a change in circumstances and you wanted to subdivide, it'd be a non-compliant activity, wouldn't it?
Correct. That's the activity status. We propose discretionary. Ms. Connolly, 42, recommended non-complying. I've got no problems with that, simply because that's not our intention. Yeah.
Okay. And just this argument on coverage, you're seeking 70. 42A is saying 60. You said, "Oh, we'll accept 60 if what? What's your qualification?"
I'd like council officers just to confirm the definition that we're working towards for site coverage, because if we're just talking purely to building coverage, the buildings themselves, we're very happy with the 60. We'll accept that. It's dependent on that clarification. I think we can have that discussion after that. If it's something different, and as an example includes mass amounts and all of the impermeable surfaces, I need that clarified, because that could push us into a spot which, who knows? And I don't want unnecessary resource consents for the client.
And the heritage distance, you've heard the explanation there. What's your position on that, having heard that evidence?
My position is as it was when I agreed with the extent that was recommended in 42A. Like I've been to the site many times. I'm no heritage expert, re-clarify that. But the building is substantial, it's beautiful, you can see it very well when you enter the site. I agree with having some setback around the building, but I believe, in my view, that it should remain as recommended in 42.
My recollection of going there is that you sort of, it's a very imposing building, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And I suppose your argument as well, because you're going to see it anyhow, it's not going to change the context too much.
Correct.
Okay.
I think what we're saying is that, and I'm referring to Betty Connolly's outline, that those outlines that she's present the building very, very well. And I find those additional ones from Heritage New Zealand as being unnecessary.
Yeah, and you want some flexibility as to location of buildings, etc.
Absolutely, we actually have, in one of those triangles, we actually have plans to put the first Maori school from the Bay of Plenty. And
which store?
It was the first Maori school in the Bay of Plenty. It's a building that we have sitting on site, and so we haven't been able to put it on site because it actually goes across two of the titles. So it required setbacks and resource consents and all sorts of things. So it's sitting there. Once this goes through, we've got to put that in the position where the Heritage New Zealand people have actually outlined. And that is going to form part of the precinct for the back of the site. So I mean, it just and it does absolutely nothing to take away from the visual aspects of the heritage building.
Yeah. Okay. You're killing the goose that laid the golden egg in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I'm extremely aware and sensitive to the visuals, and I did explain that to the heritage people when they arrived on site. That is paramount to me.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Just a few from me. Can we address this building/site coverage issue first? Because the two terms are quite different, aren't they? Building coverage is buildings, and site coverage or impervious surfaces is something quite different. Looking at proposed, and this is in the section 42A report, looking at S8, it refers to site coverage for all buildings must not exceed 60%. Reading that on its face, that's not about impervious surfaces. That's about building footprints. Is that the intention, Ms. Connolly?
Mr. Gordon and I have just been checking that through with the definitions from the hearing 5. And
Yes.
the definition for building coverage is actually talking about buildings per se.
Exactly,
So,
that's what I was doing, the same thing. Is
I
that the
think
intention of that rule? Because that's
Yes,
the notified rule.
Yeah, I think to get round this issue of what Mr. McNutt has, if that was changed to building coverage, I think it sorts that problem out.
So he has said if it relates to buildings, he's happy with 60%.
Yes.
And so are you if it relates to buildings, just to be clear.
Yes.
All right, good. Thank you.
Can I just raise one more point, please?
Sure.
Does that building coverage definition refer to net site area, Ms. Colony?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
I think we should explore what net site area looks like as well, because what I'm looking at talks about, I just want to make sure that it's just buildings.
It is just buildings, but I mean, we're not here to debate the definitions in the plan as a whole. We're here to understand what rules it is that you want to apply here and hear the various views on them. What is it that you're seeking, leaving aside how it's worded? What is your 60%? 60% of what is it that you're seeking?
Yep, just clarify, 60% of the buildings and their coverage.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think Ms. Connolly's saying she accepts that as a proposition. Is that correct, Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Just on the issue of visitor accommodation buildings, there's no limit on the footprint that they each occupy other than the overall site coverage. There's a limitation on the number of buildings and there's a limitation on the number of guests in each one. But doesn't that mean that each one could potentially be, a 5-bedroom suite, such that the visitor accommodation isn't, like a motel with 6 guest bedrooms, but it's something way more elaborate than that? What's the intention of that, Mr. McNutt?
So the intention is to reuse the historic buildings that Harry is relocating to the site, which are, in my view, smaller buildings and not a 5-bedroom ensuite.
No, and I accept that that's the intention. Is that what the rules say?
No, as the rules are, you could, subject to all the building and bulk and location standards, have a larger building.
And that's not the intention though. So why are they so, if I could put it colloquially, so loose, those rules?
They don't need to.
I understand Mr. Mowbray's intention, but Mr. Mowbray won't be, necessarily the owner of this out into the future. And, we've got to look at the plan as it's written and as someone else looking at it would interpret it. And if those rules are much more permissive than current intent, I would have thought we'd need to sort them out.
Sure. I guess I look at it as though it's going to remain in one ownership because the subdivision rules, objectives and policies in the framework, in my view, would be very difficult to get around, not to mention servicing.
But they don't have to be subdivided to make them much bigger than Mr. Mowbray currently intends. I mean, there's nothing in the rules, as I read them, and correct me if I'm wrong, that says the intention of these buildings are the railway cottages and something of like size. There's nothing in here other than 60% site coverage and some setbacks and heights that limit the footprint of each one of these buildings, does it?
No, you're right. Just as a suggestion, we would be happy to manage that potential through some sort of limitation on bedrooms per building, as an example. Or,
I think the problem is we're not able to deal with sort of concepts. We need to make a decision on the plan with some rules that are fixed. And we're not going to draft them. We're not going to take that concept and turn it into something as a panel. So I think we'll come back to that at the end of the hearing, because I think I haven't finished my questions yet, but I think there may be a couple of other points along the same line where some collaboration and provision of tidied up wording might be a good idea. And I guess you're amenable to that, Mr. McNutt?
Yes.
And you would be too, Ms. Connolly?
Yes, we are.
And to the extent that it was heritage related, this conversation probably isn't, but you'd be amenable to that as well, Ms. McKelly? Just
yes,
a nod will do. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Is the following on from Mr. Cooney's question, and it was about the difference between residential units and the visitor accommodation. And it's a question, I think, for you, Ms. Connolly, in the first instance. Is a residential unit, if I've got the correct term, I've always taken that to mean that it's something that someone lives in permanently. And if it becomes essentially not a rental property, because a rental property is still lived in permanently, but if it becomes something like a B&B or a motel unit, is it still a residential unit as per the plan, or does that flick it into visitor accommodation?
My understanding is all the way through here that dwellings were residential, as you said, permanent residents. I know that C is permanent residence. C on site is permanent residence.
Yes.
I don't know about the other numbers of buildings, but to me, the dwellings are residential permanent residents, and the visitors accommodation is exactly what it is classed, visitor accommodation. And you come in, you go out. You don't live there permanently.
Okay, so there's a clear distinction between use, not just the buildings, yes? And
Yes, to me there is, but I'm not sure whether everybody else has that same.
Well, that's what I wanted to check with Mr. McNutt and Mr. Mowbray. Can you just clarify exactly that situation, please, so that we're absolutely clear?
My view that visitor accommodation would be temporary accommodation, not permanent. And
what about the residential units?
Permanent.
So there's no, I might have misunderstood what you said earlier then. So the dwellings are exactly that people live in there permanently, like C does at the moment.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, A and B are on separate titles, and they're actually sections, like they're not actually on that, so they're actually houses that have been built there as houses on those bits of land.
Okay, all right, no, that's helpful, thank you. And I think that's all I've got. Have the panel got any more questions that have arisen based on hearing what others might have asked or the answers that have been given? No, it sounds like there aren't. Other than the matters that we have to make a decision on, and there's the setting issue, we've got the information. We'll need to make a call on that. But in terms of as I understand it, the three issues where there's some finessing necessary is the size of the visitor accommodation buildings to provide some clarity around what that means. Sorry, there's only two. There's that one, and then there's the issue around the traffic movements rule. And I'd have to say at the outset, I'm not at all persuaded that this average maximum as proposed works. I think it's unenforceable. So I just encourage you to perhaps have a think about that a little bit more. It may be that it can be finessed, and this is a drafting issue, not a substantive issue, I want to make clear. What I think the way to do it, we've always asked for that we get a reply version, if you like, from section 42A report writer that says, look, I've heard all the what's happened during the course of the hearing. Here's what I now recommend. I think that's what we want to do here, but we'd encourage and ask Ms. Connolly to liaise with the other parties in relation to drafting and make it clear in that final version where the disagreements still are or aren't. So if, for example, you have a difference between Mowbray Group and yourself about average traffic movements, for example, we've just got the two versions in front of us so we can clearly see where it is you might have got to. Is that a sensible way forward?
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Ms. McKellie, you happy with that? To the extent that it may involve you, I don't know that it will or won't, but you're happy to participate as needed?
Yes, that's fine.
And is that okay with Mr. McNutt and Mr. Mowbray?
We agree to that. That's fine.
Thank you. And I think the other one, sorry, there are three. The other one's the building coverage clarity, just to make it very clear that it's not site coverage of buildings. I think it was the term that might have been used. Yeah, site coverage for all buildings. It's building coverage. Have I missed anything in terms of those things that from any of the parties need tidying up?
Can I just ask, Mr. Chair, at the beginning, I spoke about permeable surfaces. Can I just make that clear as to what that actually is, that it excludes the wastewater disposal area?
Well, let's have that conversation now. What's the Mowbray Group view on that? Having heard what Ms. Connolly said during the course of the hearing.
I'm unsure as to why Ms. Connolly wants to separate out the on-site wastewater disposal area. If it's for an amenity reason, the on-site wastewater disposal area is basically not going to look any different to as it does now, because everything will be underground. So perhaps you could clarify that for me. Otherwise,
let's not do that now, because we don't want to have a sort of an ongoing debate between the two of you. I think let's add that to the list. I think that's a helpful suggestion. So we've now got those four things that you'll liaise offline and come back on.
It works for us.
We're not trying to be awkward, but we don't want to start drafting plan provisions ourselves and find that we've interpreted everybody incorrectly and we end up in a situation where no one's happy. Whereas if you can give us the versions in front of us, hopefully agreed, that's easy. If they're not agreed, at least we've got two lots of words and we can pick the one that we prefer.
With reasons, yeah.
And if there are reasons for differences, it would be helpful to know what they are rather than just the bland words.
Can I have one for the question?
Sure.
And that was when you talked about the number of dwellings, and Mr. Mowbray told us that, and I certainly had assumed that they were all there, but Mr. Mowbray tells us there's two separate titles, that two of the houses are actually on separate titles. So therefore, are they not counted in the total number, or are they counted?
They are counted at the moment. There are actually 5 titles, Diane. So
5 separate titles for a residential On
got
site.
5 titles on the site. The total 15-acre site, or thereabouts, there are 5 actual individual titles on it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I hadn't understood they were all separate titles. So understanding
Sorry,
that
there's
now.
6. No, there's 6.
6.
I didn't count the other side of the railway line.
Oh, okay.
But
Thank
you're
you.
taking a global approach, aren't you? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, and look, we're not wildly bothered about the time it takes you to do that. We're not sort of sitting here waiting for you to do it. But the sooner would be better than later. So if you could aim, I think maybe within the next fortnight to, does that sound a sensible time frame?
That's fine from council's point of view.
But that's indicative. I mean, if it happens quicker, great. If it needs a little bit more time, we're not going to beat anybody up for it. That's just a suggestion, in there or thereabouts. Sorry, Mr. Cooney.
What's that?
Did you say something, Mr. Cooney?
Oh, no, I didn't. I actually cleared my throat, but now I'm on. I'd like to just acknowledge Mr. Mulberry's efforts on this. We haven't made a decision yet, but well done.
Indeed.
Very good. No, I think we all endorse that. I mean, I know there's some differences of opinion on some of the details on the, probably it's fair to say, on the margins of the overall concept. Yeah, and I think it's a pretty exciting sort of an exercise. So yeah, endorse those comments.
I can assure you it's not exactly a sensible thing to do.
I'm told that may not be the first time, Mr. Mowbray.
Most of them have worked in the end.
All right. Look, thank you very much, everybody. That's been very helpful, and appreciate the way that we've efficiently moved through things without, I think, shortchanging anybody in terms of expressing what they want to express. So if the panel can hold fire when we adjourn, we will adjourn. And yeah, as I say, if people could log off the panel, we'll just have a quick discussion.